Today this is what we're working on. It is quite the off-road buggy. It's got a few different things going on, but it is essentially a 92 Geo Tracker. I don't know anything about this engine. I was 5 years old when this was built. But we're going to take the time, look at a diagram. This is in for a crank no start. And they put a new coil on it, new ignition, igniter, and new plugs, wires, handful of other things. So we're going to figure out what is really going on while we figure out how this system even works. Alright, we are going to look at this carefully and closely. You'll have to take my word for some of this, but so it's got an ECU, it's got an igniter that acts as an ignition control module that's controlled by the ECU. It's got a noise filter in place. The ignition coil is a standard 2-pole coil, so it'll have ignition feed on one side and then switch to ground for dwell control on the other side. And the distributor has the crank angle sensor built in. We have ground, ignition plus, and signal from that. So that's how the ECU knows when to dwell the coil to make the coil fire using the igniter is from the crank angle sensor. So we're going to verify we don't have spark and then logically work through this system to figure out what isn't working. And we're going to use a scope because that's just the easiest thing to use. So follow along and we'll see what we come up with. Alright, the first test we're going to test on this is just coil feed and coil control. I've got it back probed into the coil there. And it's hard to tell with the mess of wires there, but I also have a battery trace ran. So if you look at my scope here, the green trace is my battery voltage. The blue trace that you can't see right now is going to be my coil control, and I'm going to be looking for that inductive kick on that, so that's why we have it set pretty high voltage. And then the red trace is going to be the coil feed. So we're going to go ahead and start our scope and see what happens when we crank it. So we're going to stop that, and you can see if we put our tracers out there and hit control, put my marker right, and put our, so you can see we're about 9 volts cranking on our control, we're about 9 volts cranking on our feed, and our battery voltage drops also to about 9 volts. So what that tells me is we do not have coil control. So now we're going to go to the igniter to see if the igniter is being commanded. So if the ECU has control of the igniter, that's where we're headed next. Okay, now we're back probed at our igniter up here. So this green is going to be the coil control, and blue is the igniter control from the ECU. Now don't get confused, because on the trace, green is blue and red is blue. So the red trace is going to be our ECU control of the igniter, and the blue trace is our coil control. So now we're going to go crank the engine again. And we'll stop that, and you can see our blue trace. We put our markers back out there. You can see we're at about 9.5 volts, so we're still not getting any control on our coil control. And you can see we're not really seeing anything on the control for the ECU control, and we can actually zoom in a little bit on that, and you can see something is happening here, and we got a kick of around 300 millivolts is where we're at here, and you can see that stays high, but nothing happens. So we could have a failing ECU, or we could have no crank angle input. So now we're going to go verify we have crank angle input, and then see where we're at from there. Okay, we're back to the coil control on this side, and down there is your crank angle sensor, and I'm back probed into the white wire, which is the signal wire to the ECU. We're going to go ahead and start that. And you can see here, we put our markers out. We're only getting about 200 millivolts on that, and no real usable signal on our crank angle sensor. So we might have a feed issue to that sensor. We might have a faulty sensor. And you can see our coil control still stays high at around 9 volts cranking. So now we're going to check our power and ground to that crank angle sensor. Alright, we are back probed into the ignition positive here, which is the blue and black wire. I don't know if that'll focus. Which is fed by this main relay. And since this thing is extremely custom, I'm being lazy and don't want to try to chase that down yet. But key on, engine off, I do not have battery voltage on that. So we're going to bump the starter, give it a quick crank, and see if we have voltage. Yeah, and you can see we got something there. About 900 millivolts while cranking. Not really enough to worry about, and it's probably just an elevated, probably from an elevated ground somewhere. So I'm not even going to worry about that 900 millivolts right now. I'm assuming my main relay isn't being active, so I need to check some fuses and see if my main relay is being activated. Alright, we are going to test at this main relay. We're just going to go down the list. Black and white, blue, blue and black, black and red. I'm going to hold the scope probe on each one of these for 3 seconds, and then give it a second between each one, so I'll be able to tell what I'm hooked to. So let's go do that. So key on, engine off, and the first one we're going to go after is the, there we go, black and white. So we're going to go after black and white and then blue. See if I can get this up here. So you can see this back corner one is the black and white. So get in there. So that's black and white. So we're going to count to 3. Good. And then we're going to go to the blue, which is the other back corner. Yeah. See if I can't stab myself in the hand. There we go. So we're on the blue. We're going to give that a few seconds. Alright. And then we're going to go to the blue and black. And get on that one for about 3 seconds. Alright. And then we're going to go to that red, the black and red, for about 3 seconds. Alright, so now we can go to our scope and see what we see. So we got it all on the 102nd window. So you can see we have, this noise is probably from my finger touching the probe. So you can see we did have a 12 volt feed, and we had a whole lot of nothing in here. And then it looks like the last thing we looked at also had a 12 volt feed. Actually, it doesn't. It's about 8.6 volts. So that may be our issue. So let's take a look at our diagram. So we went right down the list with these. So the first two, the black and white, was our ignition coil feed to the control. Blue was ground on the control, which, judging by that, blue was grounded. The blue and black is our out to all of our components, and the red and black, or the black and red, was our fuse feed in, and that was actually pretty low. So our fuse feed in was pretty low. So what we're going to do is go to that fuel injection fuse, verify we have good power out, and then we probably have a faulty relay. So that's what we're going to go figure out. Okay, so we have the Relay Sim Pro hooked up in place of the main relay, and we're just going to go through the circuits. So again, we've got 30 and 87 are going to be our load or our switched side of the relay, and 85 and 86 are our controls. So let's look at the Relay Sim Pro. You can see on pin 30 we have 13.3 volts. I've got a maintainer on this. So let's go to pin 87, or 86 and 85 first. So we're going to cycle the key on. Then you can see our green light comes on for 86, and we have 12.8 volts on 86. We have basically 0 volts. We have 200 millivolts on 85, but that's enough to light this light. I don't know if it's enough to move that relay, and we're going to test that later here before we condemn that relay. But on 87, if I turn the switch on, I get a 200 milliamp draw and voltage on 87. So now that we have that with the key on, we still are back probed at our coil control. So we're going to go ahead and start our oscilloscope. We're going to crank it. And you can see now I have good coil control. So now I know that problem is either a faulty main relay or the ECU's inability to carry the small amount of current that it takes to actuate the main relay. And why I'm concerned with that is because of that 200 millivolts on 85. So we're going to plug the main relay back in, monitor the control at the ECM, and see if that is enough to switch that relay. And what we'll do is we'll use a test light to pull that circuit to ground to see if the relay will actuate if we manually ground the control side of the relay. So that's where we're headed. I'm going to take all this off, put the relay back on, and then we're going to do that. And granted, I could have did that with the relay in, but I wanted to make sure that this would have coil control if the relay is being activated, which we know it is, because when we turn the key off, control goes away. We turn the key on, control comes back. So I know it's trying, but I'm really worried about that 200 millivolts on that ground side of the relay control. Okay, so now we have the You can see that there. We have the test light across the coil control side, or the coil side of the relay. So get my light back up here so you can kind of see what we got going on. So I've got it just across there with the relay in. So if that 200 millivolts on the ground side of the control side of the relay was the problem, when I turn this key on, the light wouldn't light because it would be using all of the current and available voltage to try to light the relay. So I know for a fact that it is grounding that side of the relay control, power's flowing through it, so I know the relay itself is the faulty component. See the lights on across there with the relay in place. And if that 200 millivolts was the problem, it wouldn't light a light across there because it would be struggling even harder to ground that circuit with the additional 200 milliamp load, and that relay probably takes less than 100 milliamps to activate. So we're done with this part of the diagnosis. It still doesn't start, and when I did crank it a few minutes ago, it backfired through the intake, then backfired through the exhaust. But it's got new plugs, wires, cap, rotor, so we're going to verify, make sure everything was installed correctly. Success! We're still waiting on a main relay, and I've got a couple of pictures I'll put in the video of the distributor rotor was installed incorrectly, making it fire through an open exhaust valve. But she runs now.